Gothic Line, Gotenstellung, was the name given by the Germans to the set of fortifications built on the Tuscan Emilian Apennines to defend the Po Valley from the Allied advance from the south. In the summer of 1944, when it appeared that it was to be overwhelmed by Allied troops, the Germans preferred to change its name to the less high-sounding Green Line, Grünlinie, but the term Gothic Line has remained generally in use. The tactic of slowly retreating to successive fortified lines, such as the Gustav at Cassino, was adopted with success by the Wehrmacht throughout the Italian campaign. The Germans had begun to study the possibility of fortifying the Apennines as early as August 1943, when the Allies were still fighting in Sicily, but the actual work began only in the spring of 1944 under the direction of the organization Todt. The Gothic was not a continuous line of fortifications, but a set of defences laid out deep the Apennines by exploiting the natural elements of the terrain that traversed Italy from the Tyrrhenian coast at north of Viareggio to the Adriatic at Pesaro, for about 300 kilometers as the crow flies. It included thousands of reinforced fieldworks made of wood, stone or reinforced concrete, and anti-tank ditches, including one 5 kilometers long at Santa Lucia near the Futa Pass, all protected by barbed wire and extensive minefields. Fortunately for the Allies, the Gothic works were far behind schedule, and at the time of the attack, the central Apennines were still unprotected compared to the coasts, which were more vulnerable and therefore better fortified. The easiest points of Futa Line were the Futa Pass and the Adriatic coast, which were therefore fortified with greater effort. At the Futa, in addition to the long anti-tank ditch, concrete casemates were set up reinforced, in some cases with Panther tank turrets with 75mm cannon, gun emplacements and shelters for troops. The forward line of defense included entrenchments defended by barbed wire and extensive minefields, and 2 of the 5 German divisions placed to defend the entire Apennines were concentrated at Futa Central Apennines. For these reasons, the Americans decided to attack at the Giogo Pass, defended by few troops and less fortified, deceiving the Germans about their true intentions with a strong diversionary attack by the 34th Division. Infantry on the Futa route, straddling the Calvano Ridge and through Calenzano and Barberino. Allied operations in the Tyrrhenian sector, under the control of the U.S. 4th Army Corps, also comprising Commonwealth troops, assumed a secondary character to the effort north of Florence, and units deployed along the Tuscan coast conducted operations on a relatively limited scale until the spring of 1945. American plans. The order of attack against the Giogo Pass included a parallel maneuver against the reliefs on either side of Highway 6524, now 503. The Monticelli Range to the west, sector of the 91st Infantry Division, and Mount Altuzzo to the east, sector of the 85th Infantry Division. The units would have enjoyed the support of the artillery of the entire 2nd Army Corps and an intensive aerial bombardment preparation, conducted first in depth, then close to the front. Large numbers do not deceive. The U.S. 5th Army included 10 combat divisions out of 262,000 personnel, yet the front-line fighting, the decisive actions on the ground, were supported by units with less than 1,000 men, a few battalion infantry companies. On the German side, the disproportion was even more pronounced. The 4th Parachute Division alone, already understaffed, held a front of almost 20 kilometers from Futa to Mount Pretone, with practically no reserves available. Among its men, only a few were veterans of Anzio. Almost all were untrained replacements who had just arrived from Germany, sometimes without ever having fired a rifle shot. German positions. German defences on Monticelli included rock-cut positions and shelters reinforced with timber and topsoil. The defense lines on the ridge were protected by bands of barbed wire 1 meter high per 100 feet deep, the only two natural approaches to the ridge. 2 gorges of a stream had been mined. On the northern slope, Todt had built shelters extending 20 meters inside the mountain, with capacity for 20 men, and had dug into the rock a shelter of 50 places for the command. The defensive outposts covered the highway just beyond on the Morteau. On the Altuzzo, the German lines made a semicircle at altitude, anchored on the west to a ridge-prominent ridge that overlooked the state road and connected to the east with the summit of the mountain, elevation 926. The outposts covered the approaches to the massifs below the west ridge and on the main ridge at elevation 782. The attack on Monticelli, September 12 to 18, 1944, the 363rd Regiment of the U.S. 91st Infantry Division deluded itself into thinking it could take both Altuzzo and Monticelli without the help of the 85th Division. But it meets greater resistance than expected, with heavy and accurate mortar concentrations and machine gun fire, and suffers night counterattacks by the German paratroopers. The use of artillery support is hampered by uncertainty about the positions of own troops. It is not until the late afternoon of September 15, when the frontline units managed to direct artillery fire against the German positions, Company B of the 1st Battalion reaches the ridgeline on the western slope, reduced by then to only 70 men out of the initial 200. The company, isolated on the Monticelli Ridge under intense fire, held out for 2 days without supplies to many counterattacks. The situation stabilized only on September 17, when the 3rd Battalion on the right wing managed to reach elevation 871, the Monticelli Plain. In the B Company sector, which has endured the greatest effort, there were more than 150 dead and 40 German prisoners, compared to 14 dead and 126 American casualties. But overall losses on both sides are much higher. The attack on Mount Altuzzo, September 12 to 18, 1944. The 85th Infantry Division assigned the task of seizing Mount Altuzzo to the 338th Regiment, which sends forward the 1st Battalion. But difficulties orientation in the terrain and poor or erroneous information about the situation disorganized the attack of the forward companies against the 2 ridges of Altuzzo, toward altitude 782 and toward the West Ridge, nicknamed Peabody Peak by the Americans after the name of the commander of B Company. The action breaks down into a series of fights between a few men, with repeated German counterattacks, broken only by the intervention of American artillery, which also hit, decimating the 1st Battalion of the 12th Parachute Regiment, manning the positions on Mount Altuzzo. On September 15, the Germans called the 3rd Battalion into the line, which regained the lost positions. The German command, which has finally realized that it is facing the main attack of the I-Corps army, belatedly orders the rush of the few available reserves toward the Jaogo, sending to the line all able-bodied men. These included several dozen Lithuanians enlisted by the Wehrmacht, several of whom surrendered to the Americans at the first opportunity. On September 16, the 1st Battalion of the 338th Infantry attacked again, finally reaching the top of Mount Altuzzo. But the key to the breakthrough is actually the capture of Mount Pretone and Mount Veruca by units on the right of the U.S. deployment on September 17. An 8-kilometer breach in the Gothic defenses. The German command realizes it is defeated and orders a retreat to the mountains beyond Firenzuola. On September 18, the Jaogo Pass is in American hands.
In Italy, across the Apennines at Mount Altuzzo, come men and arms of the Fifth Army to smash the Nazis' highly fortified Gothic Line. In conjunction with an 8th Army thrust at its Adriatic end, American tanks and mortars now blast German hillside strongholds in the center. After 10 days, the Germans are driven almost entirely out of their fixed defense positions. Tank traps, some over a mile long, cover the area. With the breaking of the Gothic Line, the broad Po River Valley now lies ahead.
In 6 days of fighting, the losses of the Second Army Corps totaled 2731 men. German figures are unknown, but certainly higher, mainly due to the effect of artillery fire that fell on the few reinforcements headed toward the front lines.